Hello and welcome to this week's Quality Talk. This week we're going to have Alice Rendell talking to us. She's going to be talking about avoiding stereotypes. She's a senior narrative designer with 10 years of experience. She works for Massive Entertainment. Yeah, hello Alice.
Hi there.
I'm going to try
Thanks for having me.
To make you spotlight. There we go.
Great, I will share my screen. Can you see the presentation okay?
Yes, it looks amazing. Perfect.
Great. Thank you for the introduction and welcome to everybody online. Thanks for joining. Yeah, I'm going to talk to you today about equal game design. And my name is Alice Rendell. I work at Massive Entertainment, as mentioned. And for those of you who don't know Massive, I'll just briefly explain who we are and what we do. We are a Ubisoft studio based in Malmo, and we've been making games for over 20 years and have worked on some big AAA titles, including World in Conflict, Far Cry 3, and The Division 1 and 2. We now have over 650 people at the studio from all over the world. That photo that you can see on the screen is actually a picture of our old building. We moved into a new one a few weeks ago, but we're all working from home, so no one's had a chance to see it yet, which is a bit of a shame. But when we go back, we'll be in a brand new building. And I currently work here as a senior narrative designer, which is a job role that falls somewhere between a game designer and a writer. I actually started my career over 10 years ago as a game designer. And then I transitioned into narrative design because I always loved the story side of things. That's probably why I've ended up working on a bunch of narrative-driven games, including an episodic adventure, The Descendant, and my own little indie title, The Monster in Me, and a JRPG called Zodiac Orcanon Odyssey, which I actually worked on with some ex-Final Fantasy veterans, which honestly was a little bit of a dream for me. I'd grown up playing JRPGs. Actually, Final Fantasy 7 and 8 were what made me want to be a game designer in the first place. I'd play those games and I'd think, I want to build worlds like this, or I want to create characters that people fall in love with the same way I fell in love with Rinoa and Ares. And my love for games didn't stop there. As a kid, I would play everything I could get my hands on, immersing myself in all these fantastical game worlds. I am and always have been a gamer. But this doesn't mean I always felt like I belonged. Growing up, I was always aware that my hobbies were boys' activities. I liked climbing trees and playing football, and I hated Barbies and dolls and anything pink. And this was abnormal, and it led to labels like tomboy, which I still think is an incredibly damaging term. And for whatever reason, video games were one of these activities that was put into the boys column. Luckily for me, I'm pretty stubborn, and I ignored all those labels and gender stereotyping, and I decided to study computer game design at university, and eventually landed my first job in the games industry as a game designer. But if I'm honest, it took a long time to really feel like I belonged. I never really managed to shake those labels off, despite spending years trying to ignore them. And that feeling I had as a kid of being an outsider in someone else's world persisted. And as a narrative designer whose very job it is to invite others into their world, that is something that really troubles me a lot. And that is why my job is to make sure I am creating games that welcomes everyone. Because representation matters. If you play a game that has a character in it that looks like you, it is a clear message that you belong. That it's okay for people like you to play these games, or even one day make these games. I feel like on some level, every game I make is a letter to my 8-year-old self, telling her that it's okay to play games, that she does belong in this world. And now, as I pass my 10th year in the games industry, this message of belonging isn't just for me anymore, it's for everyone who feels like an outsider in the gaming world. When the Marvel film Black Panther came out in 2018, a film with a predominantly Black cast, made by a predominantly Black crew, it started a hashtag on Twitter called "What Black Panther Means to Me," which prompted responses like these. Black folk get to be portrayed cinematically as our true heroic selves instead of as afterthoughts. Being able to see women and girls like myself designing the most advanced technology the world has ever seen. It means that my kids and young Black kids everywhere will see themselves as heroes capable of leading their own narratives. If there was ever proof of how important representation is in mainstream media, then this is it. And games need to live up to that. My friend and colleague, Shella Ramanan, wrote a fantastic article for The Guardian called "Black Panther is a Wake-Up Call for Video Games," where she not only explains why Black Panther was an important milestone in the cinematic world, but also why it's important for games. And I really recommend you read it, as she talks about the importance of Black Panther for Black people better than I ever could. But how do we move forward with this? If we all agree that telling new stories that represent diverse audiences is a good idea, how do we do this in a meaningful way so we avoid the pitfalls of tokenism and we tell authentic stories instead? Well, there are lots of different ways, but I will talk today about a few tips and tricks that I think are helpful for creating new game experiences. Firstly, diversify your references. One of the big problems I see in games is that we often take our references from inside of the games industry, looking to other games for inspiration. What this means is that we are limiting our creativity to what has already been done, which means we're just creating the same thing in lots of different ways. What we should be doing instead is taking inspiration from new sources, especially if it's outside of games. Maybe the serene and Zen-like style of origami is the perfect aesthetic and mood for your games art. Or the creativity of set design on a theatre stage could influence how you construct your environment, especially if you're, say, an indie team with limited time and resources and are looking for creative ways to maximize your environment, like we see in the game, The Stanley Parable. Take inspiration from everywhere you can if you want to break the mold. Avoid duplication and repetition, and strive for new ideas. That's not to say that we shouldn't ever be looking for references inside of the games industry. We absolutely should. we just shouldn't be doing it exclusively. And if you are taking inspiration from insider games, just make sure you look outside of the genre you are making. The smallest and most obscure indie game can and does influence large AAA titles. So having spoken a bit about inspiration and researching for games, what do you do once you have your idea? How can you make that idea fresh and different so you aren't just regurgitating the same old thing? Well, there are lots of different ways, but I'd like to share with you today a methodology that I use, which revolves around nailing your core pillars. What I mean by core pillars is the fundamentals of your game. It's the world you have, it's who your avatar is, and the gameplay you will offer. For this, I actually like to use the following. This is a diagram which consists of 3 core pillars. It has your world, which refers to your setting, location, and environment. That doesn't have to be a whole world. Your world could be a kitchen, like in the game Overcooked, or a futuristic office, like in Job Simulator. The gameplay is your systems, your mechanics, and your features. And the role is what your character is doing in this world that is tying those 2 other pillars together. For example, if we look at Red Dead Redemption, the world is the Wild West. The main avatar's role within that world is a cowboy, and the gameplay for that character, which makes sense in that world, is horse riding, gunslinging, and general cowboying shenanigans. These 3 core pillars all support each other. So if you change the setting, and instead of the Wild West, we had, say, space, it would change some fundamental things about your gameplay. So the 3 of these need to always support each other and work together. As a narrative designer, this diagram is really important to me because what I want and what I strive for is to have these 3 core pillars be in harmony. So if you removed one, the others would no longer work and would feel disconnected with the rest. But how does this diagram relate to diversifying games? Well, what you can use this diagram for is exploring unique ideas. If your diagram looks suspiciously like something you've seen before, keep tweaking your world and your gameplay and your role until you come up with a new combination. So many games are set in the same types of fantasy or post-apocalyptic worlds. And so often it's the same types of characters that are inhabiting these worlds. Use this model as a basis for creating combinations that haven't been seen before, or at least have been seen a lot less in games. For example, looking again at Red Dead Redemption, what if we kept the horse riding and gunslinging gameplay, and we also kept the Wild West setting, but we changed the role you had in this world. And instead of a cowboy, you are, say, a housewife, or a Mexican immigrant, or a First Nations American. Suddenly, you have changed your perspective on this world. And with it, you've changed the scope of the stories you can tell within it. This does come with a small caveat, though. Sometimes to make things work, you'll find that changing one pillar will affect the other. Like if we change the setting here from space to medieval Europe, a space cowboy isn't going to work anymore. Neither is flying and gunslinging gameplay. But that's okay. This is the process of creativity, and this is how you get to something new and exciting. So once you have your themes and your pillars defined, how do we avoid the trap of retelling the same stories with the same characters again and again? Because we've all seen this image, right? And I can't see people at home, but I'm hoping you're all nodding along with me. The many, many portraits of video game characters, all straight, white, able-bodied men in their 30s. Many of these characters do actually exist in different worlds with different roles and different gameplay within them. So why do they all end up looking the same? There is a reason you see this character time and time again. And it's to do with what I call the protagonist trap. In linear storytelling, like film and TV, you watch a character, the protagonist, on screen, deliberating over choices. They are designed for you to relate to them and to root for them. What's interesting for us as viewers when watching these characters is, what are they going to do next? How are they going to solve this next problem? And how is it all going to turn out in the end? We care about Rick Grimes from The Walking Dead because we want to see what happens to him. We want to find out what he'll do next. But in games, you are the protagonist, and you know who you are and what decisions you'd make. We are creating games where you are the star of the show, and we are trying to create characters that represent as many of those yous as possible. So what happens is we end up with this. Characters that have been created on the presumption that this is what the majority of the audience looks like. This is what gamers are perceived to be. White, straight, able-bodied men in their mid-30s. What happens then is it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, where only these types of people are attracted to these games. But this is not representative of the vast amounts of people who play games these days. Gamers are everyone. All genders, all ages, all nationalities, all skin colors, and all abilities. And most importantly, they're a mixture of all these things. No one is defined solely by one of these identities. People are complex mixes of lots of different things. So if you're trying to make your character appeal to the masses, my best advice to you is simply don't. I have never identified with being an Italian plumber with phenomenal jumping skills, but that has never stopped me enjoying a Mario game. Give your audience the benefit of the doubt. They can make that leap into being someone that isn't them. They are ready for new characters with different stories to tell. So when you have your 3 core pillars and you're working out who the characters of your world are, don't just put in someone you think represents your audience. Find someone who fits in that world and someone who has a new story to tell. If you have a game set in a post-apocalyptic world with the collapse of society as we know it, try not setting it in North America. We've seen that. What if your post-apocalyptic game was actually set in Scandinavia? Whose stories might you be telling then? How would that affect your gameplay? Your characters wouldn't have the same access to guns as they would in North America. So what weapons might they use instead? if they even use weapons at all? What different ways might they traverse the world? And more importantly, how do all these factors shape your characters? Play with these themes and the contents of them, tweak them and change them until you get a combination that hasn't been done before. Then create characters within them that have new stories to tell. Now I'd like to show you some examples of games which I think have done a really good job of marrying these three core pillars to create a unique gameplay experience. Firstly, I want to look at the game Beyond Eyes. In this game, you take on the role of Ray, who is a blind girl who has lost her cat, Nanny. Because Ray is blind, she can't see the world around her and therefore has to navigate via sounds. For the player, this means you can only see the environment that is close to Ray, or the environment that she can hear. The role of this character within the world is the gameplay. If Ray wasn't blind, then she would not be experiencing the world in the same way. Those little things that you might take for granted in other games, like working out which way to go or locating a threat, this would not be the same gameplay if it was a different character in a different type of world. Those challenges that you face as a player would not exist if Ray wasn't Ray. Another example is the game Holding On, The Troubled Life of Billy Kerr, which is actually a great board game where you play as a palliative care nurse looking after a dying man. Throughout the game, you as the nurse not only have to care for Billy, but you also have to talk to him and try and uncover the memories of his life. And as you do, you build up this gradual picture of who Billy was and the highs and lows of the life he led. The game at its core is a management game. You have to make sure there are enough members of staff to care for Billy, whilst making sure that you don't exhaust your staff members by working them too hard. Then within all that, you have this character, Billy, and his beautiful life story that unfolds in little bite-sized pieces. And the combination of pillars in the game, the world of the care home plus the role of the nurse, creates this unique foundation for a game I've honestly never really seen before. And it is also, in my opinion, a fantastic example of how you don't need to rely on epic fantasy worlds to tell powerful stories. My next example is the game Bury Me, My Love. This is a beautiful interactive story on mobile where you follow the tale of a Syrian refugee, Noir, and her husband, Mayad, as Noir undertakes this perilous journey to safety in Europe. And this game has been so incredibly smart about how they created their gameplay. They've taken their setting, the real world in the present day, and asked, how do we create gameplay to tell the story of Mayad and Noir's relationship that works in the context of this universe? And what they did was this. The game actually plays out inside a chat-style interface as an interactive conversation, with the player taking on the role of the husband Maya. Over the course of the game, you're put through this emotional roller coaster of worry as you follow Noir's journey across the border and try to give her the correct advice as she encounters problem after problem. And the drama and tension of the situation is also enhanced by another very clever game mechanic. The game actually plays out in real time, sending notifications to your phone whenever Noir replies. This means that sometimes you'll not get a response from Noir for hours, allowing you, the player, to really worry for her safety. And this gameplay just wouldn't work in a different setting, with different characters telling a different type of story. And I'd also like to add that this type of game and story wouldn't work without the platform it is on, which is mobile. The creators of Bury Me, My Love have found that unique combination of pillars and told a brand new story in games. And my final example is the game Papers, Please. The premise of this game is that you are an immigration inspector at a border checkpoint, having to assess documents and make decisions about who you let into the country. Now, on paper, pun entirely intended, the premise of the game doesn't seem that exciting. But in reality, it's really intense. Each character you meet presents you with their papers for entering the country, and you, the player, has to make sure that everything is in order before letting them in, which is quite stressful. Because if you make even the slightest mistake, it is deducted from your salary at the end of the day, and you will struggle to provide for your family. But the characters you meet all have their own reasons for wanting to enter the country. Sometimes it's to see family they've not seen for years, or they are fleeing poverty or war-stricken lands. And that is where the most interesting gameplay lies. As well as having to check all the papers correctly, the game also requires you to make really difficult choices about who you should let in and who you should turn away. Forever wrestling with what's morally right versus the need to make sure your family has enough money for food at the end of the day. And like the other examples I spoke about today, this unique combination of pillars, it is what creates this new experience. The setting of this world is in war-torn lands. This game could easily have been about a soldier with fighting and combat as its gameplay. But it's not. It's telling a completely different story because of who you are in that world. And that's what makes this game so special. Now, there's one other thing that I haven't spoken about, but is incredibly important for making diverse games, and that's the team. That old saying, 2 heads are better than 1, is so true in game development. When it comes to brainstorming new ideas, your creativity is limited by what's inside your own brain. So if you add another person, you've already expanded your creativity potential. And that is how you come up with super ideas. The more you can surround yourself with people who think differently from you, people who have played different games and have different points of reference, the more you are expanding your realm of creativity. If you take 5 people who are the same age, have lived in the same town their whole lives, and have all watched the same types of movies, and you ask them to come up with the premise for a brand new blockbuster film, chances are the ideas will be more or less the same. But if you did the same exercise and took 5 different people from 5 very different locations in the world, their combined references would come up with something much more unique. So try to build your teams with this mindset. And if you don't have the means to do that, then make sure you are consulting with different types of people early on in development, or playtest the game with people outside your own immediate circle. And if you do this, then please make sure that you listen to them. Absolutely everyone should have an equal voice. It's not enough to just seek out diversity and hope that these problems will solve themselves. You have to listen to what your team is trying to tell you. You have to make sure everyone's voice is heard, which might sometimes mean adapting to how people want to speak. For example, some people are shy and not comfortable speaking up in meetings, so make sure there's a way for them to express their ideas in writing instead. Surround yourself with people different to you and give them their own platform to speak, so you can find new voices and new stories together. So I know this is quite a lot of information in a small amount of time, but if I can summarize. When you start out on your journey of game creation, make sure every step is towards something brand new. So diversify your references, nail your core pillars, try to avoid the protagonist trap, build a diverse team, and remember that representation matters. Game development is about problem solving. My greatest joy as a designer is being given a problem that I have no idea how to solve yet, because it's something that hasn't been done before. If you want to create a game that saves the princess or kills the bad guy villain with a gun, then you aren't solving anything new. Find new problems to solve, look for them, hunt them out, because that is where you will find new game experiences. It is our job as designers and creators to make sure we are creating inclusive and representative games, so that the next generation of game developers, the children who are playing games now, or the teenagers who are thinking about what career they want to have, can see the games out there and go, I can do that because I belong in this space. And that message of inclusivity starts with us as developers. So let's all work together to create games that are for everyone. Thank you. I think we'll take some questions as well.
Yeah. Är min mick igång? Yes. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna see if I can. Exit full screen, maybe. Okay, I can't find the option actually. Jag tänkte på bilden. Well, okay, let's check the chat out. Someone wrote, now it's my dream to work with the awesome teams at Massive, especially the narrative one.
Oh, thank you. It's a great team. It's a good team there, for sure.
Yes, yeah, I also feel really inspired. I wish I could find my own picture again. Yeah, maybe if you turn your
screenshot.
Yes.
Should I stop? Okay.
Yes. All right. And then. Yeah. Good. Nice. Yeah. So I I'm mind blown. That was amazing. You're really good at what you do. So I have a few questions. Firstly, did you manage to read the alumni form? And what did you think about that? The questions.
I did.
Answers.
Thanks for the translation. I did manage to, because apologies for my terrible non-existent Swedish. But yeah, I found that actually the responses were very much similar things that we say now, even in the industry, like the idea that games are presented as this male space, or this exclusive space, because it's not just about gender anymore. It's about any marginalized group that doesn't feel like they belong in games. And it's conversations that are happening and going on now. The one positive that I see happening in over my 10 years in games is that there are a lot more women I see coming into junior roles and in universities than there ever was when I was at university. But there are a lot less in senior and managerial positions. So people are coming into the industry, but they're not staying. And that to me is something that we need to start tackling even at university. It is one thing to get people into games, it's another to make them feel like they belong, so they want to stay there. But I saw seeds of that already in the responses of the form.
Yeah. Also, I've been thinking, have you felt like you've seen any changes in the games industry now? Do you feel like it's better now than it was like a few years ago, or do you see any differences?
It's definitely better. I remember the first time I went to GDC when I was a student. I think I was 20, so many years ago. And honestly, that I was one of very few women there. It was also very white, and marginalized groups just weren't there. And compare that to last year, I think I went again, and it was so much better. I met so many people from all these different walks of life, which I wouldn't feel like I would have met the first time I went. So we're doing something right. We're moving in the right direction. But we still got a long way to go. And as I said, keeping people in the industry and making them feel comfortable here is the next big step, I think.
All right. We have another question here from Therese. She works at a games company with 12 men and 3 women. How can we get the men to listen more to us women when it comes to game design, for example?
That is a great question. I wish there was a magic answer to it. Honestly, this stuff has to come from the top as much as possible. It has to come from the managers and the CEOs of the studios, because what happens a lot is the effort and the work falls on the women and other marginalized groups to promote themselves and to make sure that they're seen as belonging and that their voices are heard. And the effort and the work needs to come on the managers. And how you do that is just a lot of conversations. I mean, it's part of what I do now is I'm in a position where I can try and lay out some of that groundwork now as a senior in the industry, so that people don't have to keep pushing for this later on, which I know doesn't really help because there's no magic quick fix. All you can do is just keep on having conversations and be open and honest and call people out when they're misbehaving.
Thank you. Then we have Tula Eriksson asking, at my current place of work where I am a volunteer writer, it came up why the founder picked people and I asked about me, I got the answer that, yeah, you were good, but it might also just be because we are in need of inclusion, me being a woman. What do you think about that? Do you appreciate such comments, even if it was in a joking manner?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. My very first job in games was for a Facebook game company in Paris, and this was straight out of university, so it was my first foot into games. So I was, really excited, and I got there and they basically said, well, most of our audience are American housewives, so we wanted a woman and an English-speaking woman as well. And I was like, I have nothing in common with housewives in America, but I guess there is some well-meaning intention there to diversify, and that can't be shunned. Like, that is a step in the right direction. But on the other hand, it's problematic because it devalues someone's worth. And I think that generally what happens when you're hiring people is that people who feel like they don't belong in this industry, so women won't promote themselves and won't talk themselves up in interviews in the same way a man would, for example. And that is where some of the hiring practices fall down, I guess, and it leads to things like this. So I don't know, I'm mixed on this. It's not where we should aim to be, but considering where we are right now, at least it's a step in the right direction.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Here's one. Okay, let's see. Or did I just... Yeah, would it be possible for you to offer mentorship in narrative design?
I'm on Twitter. I think I left my Twitter thing on there, Alice Rendell. Always feel free to shoot me questions there. A lot of the other narrative team I work with at Massive are very active on Twitter and super helpful in that regards. So yeah, always feel free to shoot questions at us.
All right. Well, anything else before we... Now that you have the chance. Okay, here's one. Okay, great talk. I think it's easy to get stuck in an ecosystem of similar references. Do you have any good tips on how to find new influences? That's Victor asking.
Yeah, I mostly just put down the video games and the TV and the film and find something else. Twitter is always interesting, like follow different hashtags. There's a hashtag which is Black Twitter. If you look at that and you go on that, you can see the conversations they're having and you can find out what they care about. And it suddenly opens your world and gives you a whole host of new references. So I actually think Twitter is a great tool for like finding hashtags and seeing what's important to different groups of people. And it's very easy to connect with those people outside of your own, echo chamber sphere. So start there and see where it leads you.
Nice. Okay, let's see. Any more questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Alice. This was
Thank you for
great.
inviting me. It was great.
So glad that I got the chance to hear you out. Yeah. All right. So thank you for today. Next week we have Linnea Harrison joining us. She's going to talk about equality in projects and teams, and she's creative director at Neat Corporation. So welcome next week, same time, same day.